Let's listen to God's Word then. Go ahead and take one of the Bibles that are there in the pews. Different versions, that's okay. Notice where they're different. Because usually we have God speak to us. Luke chapter 7, this is the faith of the Centurion, verses 1 through 10. When Jesus had finished saying all these things to the people who were listening, he entered Capernaum. And there was a centurion servant who his master valued highly. He was sick and about to die. The centurion heard of Jesus and sent some elders of the Jews to him, asking him to come and to heal his servant. When they came to Jesus, they pleaded earnestly with him, "This man deserves to have you do this because he loves our nation and has built our synagogue." So Jesus went with them. He was not far from the house when the centurion sent friends to say to him, "Lord, don't trouble yourself, for I do not deserve to have you come under my roof. This is why I did not even consider myself worthy to come to you. But say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I myself am a man under authority with soldiers under me. I tell this one, 'Go,' and he goes. I tell this one, 'Come,' and he comes. I say to my servant, 'Do this,' and he does it." When Jesus heard this, he was amazed at him. And turning to the crowd following him, he said, "I tell you, I have not found such great faith even in Israel." The men who had been sent returned to the house and found the servant well. This is the word of the Lord for us this day. Thanks be to God. Well, we've made it through Mission Month. That's January. And now we're turning for this next month to a focus on justice. The issues of justice here at SPC. And we're going to continue following the narrative lectionary as we go through the Gospel of Luke with an eye towards how Jesus calls us to live in a chaotic time with a hostile government. And that's not just first century Palestine. That means us right here where we are. So in our passage, Jesus has returned to Galilee. He's in the town called Capernaum. And Capernaum is in some ways Jesus' headquarters when he stays in Galilee. He's known there by the synagogue. He's got a home base, that's Peter's house, that he stays out of. And he is known by this centurion who is stationed in this important trade city in northern Palestine. Then the centurion has a problem. There's a servant that he cares for who is very sick. And the only one who can help is Jesus. So he sends word asking for help. Now, on the surface, that doesn't seem like that big of a deal, does it? I mean, Jesus has healed a lot of people. He's healed lepers, he's healed people who were blind, he's healed men, he's healed women, he's healed Gentiles, he's healed Jews. But this is a little bit different. This is helping a centurion, a Roman centurion. And if you were from the ancient world, that would mean a lot to you. The Roman centurion was the most feared warrior in the ancient world. His distinctive helmet, it kind of crested from side to side this way rather than most of them that were kind of like a mohawk going back and forth. That distinctive helmet set it apart from all of the other soldiers in the unit, letting everyone know that this was not a man to be trifled with. He was an expert warrior. He was fanatically loyal, and he was a man of authority, leading sometimes 100 men. That's where the word centurion comes from. Leading 100 men into battle or more, as the case may be. So in first century Palestine, you have a land that has been occupied by the Romans, and camped in the land is a Roman legion. Now, a legion would have about 40 to 60 of these Roman centurions, who then were in charge of different garrisons, different locations of strategic importance in the land. Each one of those centurions was a living, breathing monument to the power and the ruthlessness and the brutality of Rome. It's just not easy to put into words the oppression that would have been felt by the Jewish people under the thumb of their Roman masters. Everywhere they looked, they would have seen monuments to Roman occupation, usually in the form of their fellow Jews hanging from crosses, hanging and dying. So you have this Roman centurion in Capernaum who's most likely a pretty senior officer because he's in charge of, like I said, this vital trading post at the northern end of the Sea of Galilee that then feeds into what then was Sidon and Tyre, modern-day Lebanon, and the paths that went to the Mediterranean Sea. This was an extremely important place for Rome. So think of this guy as the Roman in charge of the Jewish region of Galilee, the general of a conquering force that's been planted in the middle of Jewish towns and villages, taking their supplies, oppressing their people, and presenting an ever-present reminder of the fact that they were not free. They were under the dominion of Rome. So you'd expect that this would be a person that was hated and feared by everyone in his jurisdiction. But there are these small segments of the population that actually like this guy. And some of them are the leaders of the synagogue. They like him enough to be willing to go to Jesus and advocate on behalf of this Roman before the teacher, the healer, who had drawn crowds to him. There's something about this man that is a little bit different from most. And so they come to Jesus with this request. And, it would have been very easy for Jesus to have refused the request. Later on, he will say, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and render to God the things that are God's. Okay, creating a separation between the Romans and the things that were for them and the things that are of God. It could have been easy for Jesus to have turned away from this request. Most people would have, if they knew they could get away with it. Instead, Jesus cuts through the stereotypes of this Roman centurion and meets this man where he is. Sue started this morning talking about stereotypes. I can't believe it. You stereotype people. I mean, are you one of those kind of people? Yeah. Well, stereotypes are powerful things. They operate subconsciously, under the surface, where we don't even recognize that they're at work. They inform our perceptions, and they dictate our actions. Stereotypes divide people into groups for us. Those that are acceptable, and those that are not. Those who are safe, those who are dangerous. Those who are attractive, intelligent, good. And those who are ugly, stupid, bad. We've gone through a season of stereotypes, haven't we, over the last few months? A whole political campaign, and now we're living with a government that many fear are going to act out these stereotypes, and in fact, in many ways are already doing it right now. And the question for us as a faith community is, how are we going to respond? What's our response to these stereotypes that have been put out there. I remember being a college student at a Christian school in California during the early 90s. I know, I'm a big, I get it. In the early 90s. One morning, we awoke to news of a terrorist attack in Israel that had killed a number of people. And it turned out that as we gathered for chapel that day, the speaker who was to come before us was a Palestinian. I'm ashamed to say that many of those young Christian men and women who filed into that auditorium that day came with anger in their hearts directed at a man that they didn't even know, who they blindly associated with this attack simply because he was Palestinian. And I'll never forget this man as he addressed the group by beginning with these words: "I am a Palestinian, and I am not a terrorist." Sad that he would have to say that. But at that time, those were words that needed to be said. The stereotypes were that strong already. He went on to share that he was a Palestinian Christian. His family had lived outside of Bethlehem for generations, going back over 1,000 years. He talked about being a Christian in Israel and what that was like, being almost a third-rate citizen. They did not enjoy the benefits that the Jewish people in the land had through the government. They did not gain the social connections that the Palestinian Muslims had. They were an insignificant group, marginalized in their society. And here we were, already judging him for something that he was not. Before he had opened his mouth, he had been assessed by a bunch of middle-class, mostly white 20-somethings as a danger and a threat, based on the color of his skin, the strange way he talked, and the clothes that he wore. And to me, it's been a lasting illustration of the power of prejudices and stereotypes. Psychologist Dr. Cardwell defines a stereotype in this way: as a fixed, overgeneralized belief about a particular group or class of people. And there are some advantages to stereotypes. They allow us to respond quickly to situations based on past experiences. And sometimes we need to be able to respond quickly in certain circumstances. But the problem is that those past experiences often lead to a reactive stance in the present, leading to the disadvantage that they make us ignore the differences that exist between groups, leading to thinking about people in unhealthy generalizations rather than determining truth. We treat others according to our preconceived notions of who they are, without ever taking the time to learn about anything different. Now, some stereotypes are relatively harmless. I find that we have been stereotyped in some ways by our neighbors to the north. Do you know what they call us in Wisconsin? That we're Illinoisans, with the emphasis on the annoy. And one of them wrote down some of these things. They say, you know you're from Chicago when? You know you're from Chicago when you know what Kennedy, Dan Ryan, Eisenhower, Edens, and Bishop Ford have in common, and you curse one of them just about every day. You know you're from Chicago when "da" is a common definite article that you can put in front of most nouns. You know you're from Chicago when the Super Bowl is not the game that's going to be played later on tonight, but a game that happened back in 1986 in January. Amen. You know you're from Chicago if you know the phone number to Empire Carpet. Somebody will start singing it. I know. You're already doing it. Stereotypes. Some of them are funny. Others, not so much. The racial stereotypes that permeate our nation continue to divide us and not unite us. And I'm so grateful for our justice team that are hosting these series of house meetings this month on Tuesdays in response to racism. You know, that's an extraordinary thing for a church to do. Not many churches are mobilized in the way that our congregation is. I'm very proud of that, and you should be too. And while we want to pretend that racism is an issue that's far away from us here in Arlington Heights, the reality is that racism impacts us all right here where we live. It was, I think, Martin Luther King who said that the most segregated hour of the week is when? Sunday mornings in church. Yeah. Racism comes even to us. So how do we deal with this? How do you deal with the stereotypes? What can we do to change them in us and in others? I think the Jesus example in our scripture can help. No doubt, those who were traveling with Jesus had their own preconceived notions of what a Roman centurion was about. And if given the opportunity to help, they would have said, no way, forget. Moving on. But Jesus doesn't do that. Instead, he listens to those who come and advocate on behalf of this centurion. And he goes with them to the centurion's house. He listens to understand more about this man, and then he goes to where he lives, despite the fact that just in doing so will make him unclean ceremonially. If he steps into that Gentile's house, he will become unclean. Despite the fact that doing so will open him up to the charge of being a friend of Rome, which was not a good thing. But Jesus breaks apart the stereotypes and enters into the world of the other. And here's where the story takes a strange twist. For the centurion is not oblivious to these things. He knows what will happen to Jesus if he enters his house. He understands the political and the religious ramifications that Jesus is taking on himself. So he sends another messenger out to Jesus saying, Lord, don't trouble yourself by coming into this house. For I myself am a man under authority with soldiers under me. I tell this one to go and he goes, and this one to come and he comes. And essentially what he's saying to Jesus is, I know that you don't have to physically reach out and touch my servant to make him well. Just say the word and it'll happen. And Jesus, hearing this, turns around to the crowd that's followed him, the crowd that wants to see what's going to happen. Is he really going to go into this guy's house? And he says to them, I have not seen such great faith in all of Israel. Wow. The faith of a Roman centurion tops that of all of God's people combined. It's a faith that will endure. You know, we read about a centurion later on in the Gospels. He stands at the foot of the cross, declaring to those who are around that surely this one was a son of God. We hear about Cornelius, the centurion, in the book of Acts, who wants to know more about Jesus and to be baptized. There's no definitive evidence, except just a gut feel, that we may be talking about the same person here. That all starts when Jesus chooses to break the stereotypes of the pagan, ruthless, brutal Roman centurion by listening and having compassion and going to him. Let me suggest those are 3 acts that can help us work on breaking up our own stereotypes as well. We'll be able to step out of our preconceptions and prejudices when we first take the time to listen to the other. Second, to have compassion, and finally, to meet them right where they are. When you find yourself in a strange or uncomfortable position and sense that you may be judging someone unfairly, that's a time to stop. Close your mouth and actively listen to the other. Listen with the goal of understanding where the other one is coming from and to figure out what the needs there are that that person has. And then after that, instead of passing judgment on them, have compassion. Enter into their need. Experience that need as if it was your own. And seek to meet it in whatever way possible. And finally, go to the other. Meet them where they're at. Don't expect that they're going to come to you. That's not the way these things work. Instead, initiate. Go. Step out in faith, trusting that God is with you in the midst of it. And I can promise you that God will most certainly be with us as we seek to step out and initiate to meet the needs of others. 3 steps to break stereotypes. Listen, have compassion, and go to meet them where they are. You know, the world we live in 2017 is a world that's full of stereotypes. We get them on TV. We experience them from our leaders. They are everywhere. But as followers of Christ, it's our responsibility to break down those stereotypes, to get to know the person behind the facade and enlarge our view of the world. I mean, if Jesus Christ was willing to help a Roman centurion, who are we not called to reach out to? There's no one out there that's out of bounds for our loving care and compassion. So our challenge today is to discern our stereotypes prayerfully and seek to have the courage to listen, to have compassion, and to go and meet others where they are. And if we do these things, I know that God will use us to change this hard-bitten world that we live in into something closer to the kingdom of God. Amen?
Amen.